Introduction: Communing with evil and drinking with friends. The cracks of the decrepit loft wept rainwater from above. Open veins of knotted wood left way for droplets to gently slap the floorboards below, occasionally allowing wetted taps to break through the reverberated moans of the forgotten shack's timber frames. Upon the heavily dusted boards of the attic knelt a young woman with porcelain features. Her pure white face grimaced in pain as a single tear fought free from her blackened eyes. Duvanis Dudentot de Elda, the zealot witch chanted through the night. It roughly translated to, "The Elda, come dance and come scream," and was not a typical chant of evocation. It was a dare, a taunt aimed at something that all but a few knew even existed. The witch had taken heed of the warnings before she set off for the city. Her body would work differently when beckoning such a dark thing. Her wounds would not run dry, her joints would creak, her bones may soften, dry out, or even snap. What her mentors did not prepare her for, however, was the tricks that would play upon her senses. With bloodied wrists, her arms stretched out to the shadows that danced over the candlelights. They waltzed in time to the flickering flames, twitching spider webs and the rhythm of her words. Her long, matted hair teased the fire, just out of reach of the waxen wick. Duvanis Dudentot de Elda. Invisible fingers brushed her lips with each word, as if ready to pounce down her throat. The smell of dust and smoke mulled into a sweet odor of sickness and death. The machinations in her peripherals distracted her with faceless smiles in the darkness. Whispers in the butchered language would encourage her and taunt her back. Duvanis Dudentot. Her arm flinched at the laceration that appeared in the air, dousing one of the candlesticks as her blood sizzled in the flame. It appeared like a ripwood in a piece of paper, and as her hands steadied themselves on the wooden boards below her, the hole tore larger. Slowly at first, as if something was struggling to peel back the boundary between this place and its own. As she pulled back to ready herself, the invisible fingers took one last grasp, this time missing her lips and glancing delicately upon her cheek. She was expecting the sight of hands grasping at the ever-growing rip in the darkness, demonic and clawed, but instead there was nothing but a scene behind it, something shining and fantastical. It appeared otherworldly, something from the stars, a pit in the night sky, devouring the worlds and stars around it like water into a drain. It was entrancing, but as the darkest point began to dilate, realization hit the witch. This wasn't a celestial vision, but an eye. A giant eye peering into the new hole in its cell and staring at the frail and bloodied body that created the window between them. "Duvanis Dudentot," she bravely exclaimed as the eye focused. The candles fought against the new rush of air that steadily blew from the other side. She tried to stand but failed as a large snap resonated through her body. She fell onto her side as bleached white bone burst from her thigh. She cried out as the pain almost blinded her vision. "Elda," she panted as the loss of blood finally began to take hold. Her body collapsed, and she wrestled the chant out one final time as a desperate death rattle. "Duvanis Dudentot de Elda, the Elda, come dance and come scream." As her eyelids fell and her body became limp, the other side disappeared. A final burst of air forced the candles to lose their battle. The amused whispers rang through her ears once more in her last moments, and finally replied, "Sheldiso da Elda, Shelvanis, Sheldentot." They have stirred, the Elda. They will dance, and they will scream.
"I've no time for your fuckery, Samsol." The stout merchant belched up the dregs of his tankard as he snapped at his employee, who had clearly nursed her own drink. A third of her pint remained in her own cup. "You'll drink that up now, or I'm having it." The merchant was a bald and stout man of the West. He let his hands fall from his aged face, which displayed the deep ridges one might have from a life of laughter, or more likely, in Bellon's case, regular frowning through his furrowed brow. He dried his ale-damped beard with the sleeve of his oversized tunic and looked to his partner in crime. A younger lass from the shores, with a beautiful yet weathered face, Samsel hid her long black hair beneath a modest coif. She allowed her eyes to beam with a sense of enthusiasm, allowing the light to shine against the mild greens and dilated pupils. "Come on, man. One more for the road. You've got to admit, it's lovely here." Samsel waved her cup in front of Bellon at an attempt to entice, before taking another pathetic sip. "We've sold all your wares. You've made a killing. We deserve to enjoy ourselves before we leave." You've been enjoying yourself too much, you little shite. Bellon pretended not to be tempted as he lazily brushed the cup away. Samsol chuckled. She knew it was only a matter of time before her boss would flag one of the staff for another round, and she cared little that this one would be hers to pay for. If we haven't reached the western shores by tomorrow morning, we'll get caught on a busy trail, and then we'll both get shafted for being late. Yeah, I get that. But we could set off in 2 hours? And we'd still be well on our way to being early. Samsol's bartering skills came in useful when she was working the stall, but even more so when she was working Bellon over for another drink. Bellon stroked his thick beard in contemplation, and at that point Samsol knew she had won. However, she was honest enough to sweeten the pot. Plus, you've paid for 3 rounds. I've only paid for 2. That's hardly fair on you. Bellon had already raised the attention of a bar hand before Samsol had even finished her pitch. If we're back late and I get an earful, I swear to God I'll throw you under the cart. After Samsol's first victory, it was much easier to talk Bellon into a 7th round, and even an 8th. It was at this point that Bellon got into the swing of things and pissedly discovered that this outdoor tavern had a house special, which of course they had to try. They call this the Morin Rattlers. Bellon had given up on the service of the tavern staff and had chosen to harass the barman directly for these drinks.
Right, okay. Let's get some music on. Hopefully that isn't too loud. Let me just double check that. That seems fine. Okay, cool. So, where did I get up to? Let me put the screen over. Oh, why are you doing that? Come on. There we go. Okay, so I was writing for I can't remember how long the stream was yesterday, but I think it was around about 6-7 hours. And I finally got chapter 5 done, at least to where I want it to be right now before I revise it and potentially cut it down. So I think it worked out that chapter 5 alone was something like 20 pages, which is a bit excessive compared to the other chapters. I think it was around about 25% of the entire writing so far, which isn't too bad because there's only 5 chapters in introduction, so a little bit more than the rest. Just have a look. So 7,000 out of 21,000 words, just under 22. That is quite a bit excessive. I don't know whether I need to split this up into 2. However, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue. I'll obsess over that at some other point. So this next section is going to be with Violet. Let me just get my trusty Myra board up. So this was the entirety of chapter 5. And then I don't need this. So this is going to be the point at which Violet and Sanders meet for the first time formally. And she is going to bear the bad news that Thenuel is dead. Which is going to put a bit of a shift in the narrative because it sort of was perceived up until this point that Thenuel was going to be the lead character, but I wanted to do that intentionally to shift away somewhat to make it more about Violet. Subvert expectations and all of that. So I'm just going to get on with it and see how it goes. Just going to put another page in. Just be chapter 6. Don't know what the heading's going to be yet. Let's have a look. So what did I use for this? No spacing. Okay. I hate when it does this. Okay, so it's Times New Roman 11. Just want to keep consistent, that's all. Good start, my spelling's already terrible. Pilot shuddered uncontrollably in his sleep as flashes of the battle. It's over. a delivery coming, so I just want to double check to see where it is. Order in progress. Order may be delayed. That's fine, that'll do me. Come on, Ashley. There. Get it right. You should know this by now. In an attempt to break through the matrix. And attempt. this way yet. A few orders in line, that's fine. She resorted to grabbing a mace from the muddied ground, caving her arms weight into iron faces that screamed beneath. Into... She resorted to grabbing a mace from the muddied ground, caving her arms weight into unseen faces that screamed beneath the iron helms before her. It fought through the line with moderate success. Let's have a look at the order, 'cause I don't want to miss it. Expected around 2:15. That's fine. That is more than fine. Okay. Breathing quickened as she recalled the desperate sprints. Panting grew heavier in the night as the survivors began to disperse from some. Breathing quickened as she recalled the desperate sprint towards the forests and mountains in the distance. Her panting grew heavier in the night as the survivors began to disperse from somewhere since. Come on. Okay, order's on the way. Let's just see where it is. Oh, it's actually quite close by. He was face stricken last night. Oh, come on, your spelling is atrocious. Right, my delivery's nearly here, so I'm gonna have to go. I'll be right back. Let's have a look. I'll have to put something on for now. Turn this off. This is a good playlist, at least. I'm going to use this. I'll put this on because I've done chapter 2 now as well. Okay, I'll be right back.
Introduction: Communing with Evil and Drinking with Friends. The cracks of the decrepit loft wept rainwater from above. Open veins of knotted wood left way for droplets to gently slap the floorboards below, occasionally allowing wetted taps to break through the reverberated moans of the forgotten shack's timber frames. Upon the heavily dusted boards of the attic knelt a young woman with porcelain features. Her pure white face grimaced in pain as a single tear fought free from her blackened eyes. Duvanis Dudentot de Elda, the zealot witch chanted through the night. It roughly translated to, "The Elda, come dance and come scream," and was not a typical chant of evocation. It was a dare, a taunt aimed at something that all but a few knew even existed. The witch had taken heed of the warnings before she set off for the city. Her body would work differently when beckoning such a dark thing. Her wounds would not run dry, her joints would creak, her bones may soften, dry out, or even snap. What her mentors did not prepare her for, however, was the tricks that would play upon her senses. With bloodied wrists, her arms stretched out to the shadows that danced over the candlelights. They waltzed in time to the flickering flames, twitching spider webs and the rhythm of her words. Her long, matted hair teased the fire, just out of reach of the waxen wick. Duvanis Dudentot de Elda. Invisible fingers brushed her lips with each word, as if ready to pounce down her throat. The smell of dust and smoke mulled into a sweet odor of sickness and death. The machinations in her peripherals distracted her with faceless smiles in the darkness. Whispers in the butchered language would encourage her and taunt her back. Duvanis Dudentot. Her arm flinched at the laceration that appeared in the air, dousing one of the candlesticks as her blood sizzled in the flame. It appeared like a ripwood in a piece of paper, and as her hands steadied themselves on the wooden boards below her, the hole tore larger. Slowly at first, as if something was struggling to peel back the boundary between this place and its own. As she pulled back to ready herself, the invisible fingers took one last grasp, this time missing her lips and glancing delicately upon her cheek. She was expecting the sight of hands grasping at the ever-growing rip in the darkness, demonic and clawed, but instead there was nothing but a scene behind it, something shining and fantastical. It appeared otherworldly, something from the stars, a pit in the night sky, devouring the worlds and stars around it like water into a drain. It was entrancing, but as the darkest point began to dilate, realization hit the witch. This wasn't a celestial vision, but an eye. a giant eye peering into the new hole in its cell and staring at the frail and bloodied body that created the window between them. "Duvanis Dudento," she bravely exclaimed as the eye focused. The candles fought against the new rush of air that steadily blew from the other side. She tried to stand but failed as a large snap resonated through her body. She fell onto her side as bleached white bone burst from her thigh. She cried out as the pain almost blinded her vision. "Elda," she panted as the loss of blood finally began to take hold. Her body collapsed, and she wrestled the chant out one final time as a desperate death rattle. "Duvanis, Dudentot, da el Elda, the Elda, come dance and come scream." As her eyelids fell and her body became limp, the other side disappeared. A final burst of air forced the candles to lose their battle. The amused whispers rang through her ears once more in her last moments, and finally replied, "Sheldiso da Elda, Shelvanis, Sheldentot." They have stirred, the Elda. They will dance, and they will scream.
"I've no time for your fuckery, Samsol." The stout merchant belched up the dregs of his tankard as he snapped at his employee, who had clearly nursed her own drink. A third of her pint remained in her own cup. "You'll drink that up now, or I'm having it." The merchant was a bald and stout man of the West. He let his hands fall from his aged face, which displayed the deep ridges one might have from a life of laughter, or, more likely in Bellon's case, regular frowning through his furrowed brow. He dried his ale-damped beard with the sleeve of his oversized tunic and looked to his partner in crime, a younger lass from the shores, with a beautiful yet weathered face. Samsel hid her long black hair beneath a modest coif. She allowed her eyes to beam with a sense of enthusiasm, allowing the light to shine against the mild greens and dilated pupils. "Come on, man. One more for the road. You've got to admit, it's lovely here." Samsel waved her cup in front of Bellon at an attempt to entice, before taking another pathetic sip. "We've sold all your wares. You've made a killing. We deserve to enjoy ourselves before we leave." "You've been enjoying yourself too much, you little shite." Bellon pretended not to be tempted, as he lazily brushed the cup away. Samsol chuckled. She knew it was only a matter of time before her boss would flag one of the staff for another round, and she cared little that this one would be hers to pay for. "If we haven't reached the western shores by tomorrow morning, we'll get caught on a busy trail, and then we'll both get shafted for being late." "Yeah, I get that. But we could set off in 2 hours, and we'd still be well on our way to being early." Samsol's bartering skills came in useful when she was working the stall, but even more so when she was working Bellon over for another drink. Bellon stroked his thick beard in contemplation, and at that point Samsol knew she had won. However, she was honest enough to sweeten the pot. "Plus, you've paid for 3 rounds. I've only paid for 2. That's hardly fair on you." Bellon had already raised the attention of a bar hand before Samsol had even finished her pitch. "If we get back late and I get an earful, I swear to God I'll throw you under the cart." After Samsol's first victory, it was much easier to talk Bellon into a 7th round, and even an 8th. It was at this point that Bellon got into the swing of things and pissedly discovered that this outdoor tavern had a house special, which of course they had to try. They call this the Morin Ratless. Bellon had given up on the service of the tavern staff and had chosen to harass the barman directly for these drinks. They differed greatly from the foamy beer that the two had been quaffing up to this point. Instead of a hefty wooden tankard, these drinks were in slim yet tall cups made of hollowed-out horn. A thick, black, sugared spirit replaced the gold and bubbling beer. They both should have known better by the name alone. After all, its namesake, the Morin Ratless, was a well-known and deadly variant of snake, which could grow to a length of up to 15 feet and would tower over any man, woman, or child that was unfortunate enough to stumble into the Morin Mountains. They both remarked that the sweet yet smoky concoctions went down a treat, but it didn't take long for the Ratless to bite. The rest of the session was a haze, and it wasn't until the fresh night air of the streets hit them that they were on their way home, somehow without forgetting the horse and cart. The two agreed after a few ill-conceived shortcuts, leading to dead ends and moments of navigational loss, that they were indeed going to arrive home much later than planned. In the black of night, and still within the city streets, Bellon began to formulate several plausible excuses. "You need to relax, Bellon. You're just pissed is all." Pissed is an understatement, you twat. I'm nothing but Alco from base to bollock. Samsol couldn't help but chuckle at her partner in crime during his mild panic. That was a lovely establishment, though, he sighed. They began to exchange complimentary remarks about the tavern and its beverages as they tried to find their way through the city's streets and its maze-like layout. The conversation died somewhat as they found themselves in a massive open square. The buildings around it were much more intricate and high-class in comparison to the cramped terraced homes that they had shambled through before. "This is the council square," Samsol exclaimed with relief. "We know where we are now. Look, that's the city chambers, and over there is the mayoral estate. That means—" As Samsol tried to reclaim her sense of direction, Bellon's eyes remained fixed upon the estate that his friend had pointed towards. He was sure he saw a glint of sorts upon the roof of the home, which was extravagant and covered in pale white stone and healthy trellised vines. As he was about to lose interest and turn back, another small flash appeared. As he looked closer and cautiously made his way towards the home, he saw a shadow moving slowly upon the tiles. "Samsol, we need to find someone on patrol." Samsol pulled herself away from her drunken planning and looked to the mayoral estate. Her eyes, which were sharper than her older counterparts, could see the shape with more clarity. White robes, metal boots, a barely visible mask. She grabbed her friend as he tried to step away for help. "What are you doing?" Bellon snapped in a panicked whisper. "Someone's breaking into the mayor's house." "That's not a thief, Bellon." Samsol was as pale as a drained corpse, even in the dark of night. "It's an executioner." Bellon stopped wrestling and looked back to the figure, which now stood tall outside a window that was slightly ajar. As he fought through the haze of the alcohol, his vision had eventually focused. He could see the white robes which swayed in the gentle breeze. The moonlight glanced off armored boots and gauntlets, and an expressionless mask of silver looked towards the two as they stared back in fear. "A copulous executioner?" Bellon struggled to ask without stuttering. Samsol turned to the cart and began leading the horse with haste. "We need to get out of here and let them do their thing. Come on, Bellon, let's go home," she demanded. Bellon couldn't help but to get one more glance before he followed in shock. But this time the figure had disappeared. Nothing remained other than the now fully opened window and its elegant red curtain, playing with the breeze.
Chapter 1. Mourning the Lost and Befriending the Odd. The elder star lit the cloudless morning skies above the capital. The city's stone embraced it.
Well, that didn't work, did it? Looks like chapter 2 is cut off? I might need to look at that. Let's have a look. If I open up Cubase, is that going to cut off the stream? Let's check. Get rid of that now. So let's have a look. So if I stupidly, yes I have. Let me just double check to make sure. Yeah, it looks like that's still coming through. So if I go back to there and go to there. So what I've done stupidly is I've left the loop mark right at the same point as I was at the introduction. So if I put that there, that should now, if I export, introduction and chapter 1, export that, overwrite. Right, okay, so if I come out of this now, yeah, go for it. Close that. Oh. And then if I go to here, so
It's the mild greens and dilated your fuckery, Samsol. And we'd still, which of course they had to try, shortcuts, leading to dead ends and moments of navigational loss.
no, I'm a divvy. Introduction, and then cuts, TD, paste, replace the file in the destination. Right, let's try this again. 14th time's a charm. Yeah.
But in the evening light, Chapter 1, Mourning the Lost and Befriending the Odd. The elder star lit the cloudless morning skies above the capital. The city's stone embraced its glow whilst a shallow gust danced with crisp brown leaves upon the cobbles. A rare dry day allowed stall owners and travelling merchants to wave customers through the deep veins of Alviette with ease. Those with coin to spare would glide around those without, glancing upon goods from all over the island continent whilst avoiding the eyes of those selling. It was hard to turn down the business of a Veletian merchant, and as soon as you acknowledged their presence, the dealings began. Those with more sense than wealth did what they could to wade through these streets. Travelling from wall to wall would take a day, and getting caught in the wrong thoroughfare at the wrong time would extend that considerably. The sensible planned accordingly. But the brave or daft would use the dire alleys. This was not their official name, of course, but well suited, considering the criminality that would often take place within their depths. The hectic disorientation of the city would wash away when travelling from south to north, as there was truly little need for merchants and travellers to venture past the capital's northern gate. A day's travel beyond was a forest, and a 2 days' journey through the thick, salted mist and dark, dense trees was the Moran Mountains. They look over themselves up there and rarely deal with the world beyond their hunting grounds. In a cottage, within the northern boundaries of the capital, Theniel grasped the porcelain sink in his kitchen and oversaw his garden as it danced in the autumnal breeze. He found himself at this window a lot recently, as the serene view outside let his mind wander. The young man was once again within a memory from a few years prior, when he and his brother Keller were in that garden celebrating. Keller was chosen to lead Alvi Alviet that day, and Theniel was chosen to lead the city guard, captain of the Valetian fencers. It was a day of paperwork, meetings, and darting from cramped offices to cold marble chambers. But in the evening light, they sat outside Theniel's cottage and drank. The hesitations and nerves of the day were left at the garden gate, and they laughed along with family and passers-by alike into the early hours of the next morning. Keller slept at the kitchen table that night, an empty wineglass lazily grasped by his almost lifeless fingers. Theniel's wife, Violette, chuckled drunkenly as she helped him to bed, and with one last glance to his brother, his pride settled deep into his chest. He blinked away the memory and sharply exhaled with a heavy heart as he heard Violette moving through their home. The young man turned to smile at his wife as she entered the room, trying to ignore the same kitchen table that lingered behind her. "I told you, those black vines have been on their last legs for weeks now. They're not going to start growing just because you stare at them every morning," she smiled. Theniel laughed as he kissed her on the cheek. "It's time we get going. You know I don't mind going on your behalf if you—" "It's fine," he sighed, grabbing a heavy burlap sack from beside the kitchen door. "Plus, all of this is bloody heavy. I'm pretty sure it's all here, but I might as well check again." Even with his back turned as he hunched over the sack, he could sense Violette shaking her head behind him. He didn't blame her. He must have already checked a dozen times that morning alone. Boots, gloves, and uniform, all tailored from the highest quality ratless leather, all present, all still accounted for. He was hoping that by the end of the day it would still be his to bring back, but he doubted it greatly. The walk to the centre of the city began with earthy trails, carved out by caravans and hooves, and ended with dark cobbles and paved stones. As they made their way into the heart of the city, the chimes of the capital bells could be heard, signalling the prohibition of trade within the areas surrounding the council halls. This was procedure when voting was to begin for a new mayor, and upon the death of a member of office, but this was the first time that Theniel could recall where the bells were rung to signal both occasions in unison.
Theniel Tiet, please confirm that you stand here today as head of your elected family and represent their compliance within these proceedings. The hall was littered with robed council members, cramped to capacity upon oak pews. Their silence was deafening, judgmental and prejudicial. Theniel stood alone at the head of the marble steps before them. The request bounced from the head council member to every marbled wall around him. "I confirm that I, Theniel Tiet, am acting head of the elected family, Tiet. My family comply with these proceedings, and I stand for their interests in this matter." He learnt the formalities of a council chamber the hard way. He was never cut out for the hearings of an elected life. That was Keller's forte. Theniel's only interest was in the protection of the walls and leading good men. However, after the occasional reprimand of his own, Theniel learnt from his brother. The council head nodded, glanced at his papers and continued. "Many thanks. Before we begin, I would like it noted that as of this morning, Master Tiet's family have turned in all equipment and responsibilities belonging to that of the city. Additionally, I would like to thank you and your family for your compliance through this time of mourning." More than a few heads began to shake in careless disapproval of the empathetic remark. This wasn't unnoticed by the council head, who cleared his throat and looked back to Theniel as he continued. "To the matter of the hearing, we are present today to mark the guilt and subsequent execution of Keller Tiet, elected mayor of this great city and prior head of the elected family, Tiet." Theniel carefully dipped his head low as a minor disturbance began amongst the crowd. He allowed his auburn hair to fall over his face, more to hide the gritting of his teeth than any ounce of shame. As he raised his head once more, he caught a glimpse of Violette and his mother on the balcony, above the barking council members. With a confident nod from his mother, he looked back to the hearing. The muttering began to climb as the head showed annoyance towards the crowd behind him. Have it noted that I have requested a lack of childish demeanour from our respected council members, scribe. Have it noted. As the scribe began to frantically tear into his parchment, silence fell upon the hall once again. On the 78th day of this 1272nd year of the Elder Star, the ever-watchful and vigilant city of Copulus assigned an ordained executioner to conduct judgment of corruption upon Keller Tiet. This was conducted 3 days later, upon the 81st day of the same year, within the mayoral estate. Theniel Tiet, as head and representative of the elected family, Tiet, do you accept judgment has been passed following correct procedures as documented within this state's laws? Theniel wanted to break. He wanted to spit and curse at the melting, aged faces before him. Instead, he thought of his mother's words before the hearing. Fucking around in there isn't going to help us. They won't hear anything more than agreement. You lose it in there, and you're going to make things worse for all of us. I and my family accept. He stopped his face from falling below his hair a second time and kept his calm. Thank you, Theniel, and the respective elected family members. Have it noted that the Tiet family have followed our proceedings. Your fellow elected family members have relinquished their roles within the city council. However, I understand that you yourself wished for a vote to hold on to your own title, that of captain of the Valesian Fencers. This is, of course, within your rights to request. Is this correct? It is a role I feel I have carried out well, and the city has benefited from my efforts. The slight of supplying an emotional response fell upon deaf ears. This is correct, head councillor. He sighed in defeat. As is procedure in this situation, we have allowed a vote to take place within the city guard. As it is the fine soldiers of Alviette that are to be commanded by the captain, it is only fair that we allow them this responsibility on behalf of the city. The councillor looked at his paper, and the moment he glanced back, Theniel already knew the answer from the remorse in his eyes. And I'm afraid they have voted against, unanimously. Theniel shook his head in bemusement and looked to the scribe. Have it noted, he thought bitterly.
The vote and later election of the new mayor, Duriel Fent, took place immediately, and appropriate roles were dispersed amongst his family within the day. For Theniel, the rest of the day was spent with the newly shunned Tietz at his cottage. He was thankful for the way his mother managed the family. Her crude humour and rugged Western Shore dialect had his home filled with laughter and drunkenness by sunset. Her free arm hooked a hold of Violette, nearly throwing ale out of her makeshift goblet, an empty plant pot, and jokingly praised her. Petal. Smart thinking not taking the family name when you wed my youngest. A silent hiccup interrupted as she waved an index finger at Theniel. All this time I've been thinking, why would the poor lass want to keep a freakish name like Diassi? Theniel's 3 sisters looked on the very edge of wetting themselves as their dear mother drunkenly elongated Violette's family name. D-C Daisy. I mean, come on. Violette, always a fan of Megrit's humour, wiped a tear from her eye as she howled in a drunken stupor. To Violette Diazi, the only one of us cunts who saw this coming. Magritte attempted to down her plant pot as the family cheered Violette, but then looked to Theniel in confusion. Theni, love, are you sure you don't have any more glasses? This has got friggin' holes in the bottom of it. Theniel and his family laughed into the night, but as his sisters and their partners each left for their own homes, the family began to dwindle, and the silence crept back in. Violette and Megritte chatted together, as Theniel found himself back in his own thoughts, this time from the garden looking in. He wasn't anywhere in particular, not lost in a single memory, but instead gliding through different moments and conversations with his brother. He knew in his heart that Keller wasn't corrupt. He didn't have the capacity or even morality to lie or cheat, even if he wanted to. What are you doing out here? Theniel's mother nudged him from his thoughts as she handed him another drink. She tried to wrestle a smile from her son as she whispered mischievously, Glad everyone's gone home. I have a proper cup now. As always, Megrit had sobered up throughout the night, despite drinking most of the family under the table. With a single glance into Theniel's eyes, her intuition as a mother led her to the correct conclusion. Keller wasn't dodgy. Your brother was as honest as a priest, as stupid as one sometimes, and all. She sipped at her ale as Theniel laughed quietly. What about you, though? What are you going to do now? A dinner, ma'am. His mother's Western accent had caught him accidentally, and her eyebrows raised in amused surprise. I don't know, Mother, he corrected. Don't hide your Western ties, lad. The Western shores, inherited from the Skyskins. We may be mere children of spring like the majority of this bloody island, but we have their blood in our veins too, lad. They didn't fuck around with scribes and marble halls. You and Keller always took after me. West through and through. It was your sisters who took after your dad and all the capital's fancy shite. Dad was dented in the head, ma'am. He lost the plot and wandered off. You can't lose summit you never had, Theny. He was wrong in the head when I met him. Not in a bad way, mind you. Megrit smiled as she thought back. He gave me more kids than he did years. Then off he trots down the road. I wouldn't be surprised if he got distracted chasing a fucking butterfly and lost his way. There was a reason they called him Potterman, and it wasn't because he was good with clay. Theniel's mother gave him another kind nudge as he appeared to lose himself in his thoughts once more. He left me with you on the way, though, and whatever you're going to do now, me and your Vi will have your back.
Normality took some time to wash over the Tiet family. All jokes aside, Theniel was glad that his wife had not taken the family name. As a Diassi, Violette continued to work with the local stablemaster without hindrance, and any sly comments by local patrons were promptly dealt with by her protective co-workers. He would make a point to see her at work with the horses at least once a week. There was something about seeing his Vi on horseback that mesmerized him. The air catching her rose-red curls as she rode them through the pasture, the look in her eye when she caught him smiling, entranced. As with all children of spring, her skin held a sun-kissed bronze that allowed the elder star to dance upon it, and when she would dismount from her steed, her hair would always fall upon her shoulders and perfectly frame her face. In that moment, every single time, the bronze of her skin would appear like gold to him. Despite these brief moments of happiness, Theniel found himself in a rut, despite being allowed to continue to serve as a Valetian fencer on patrols. The other soldiers, some of which he once considered to be friends, had shunned him purely due to association. He was aware that some of it was probably due to pressure from their own family members, or even fear of being tarred with the same brush, but Theniel could not forget the fact that all his men voted unanimously against him. After 2 weeks of lonely patrols and dirty looks, he eventually accepted that being a member of the Guard was not in his future, and graciously stepped away from the responsibility.
Okay, right. I'm back. So, chapter 6. What have I got so far? The previous night was a haze of panic and chaos. Violette shuddered uncontrollably in her sleep as flashes of the battle hit her repeatedly. She couldn't find the child and had elected to fall back to the northern gate, reuniting with the battered Harlow and the remainder of the southern gate. She refused to leave Theniel behind at first, but Juriel and Arkham reassured her that he wasn't far behind. That and the testimony of Theniel's comrades eased her somewhat, as they witnessed him with the boy making his way north. Those who had made their way to the northern gate had no option but to push forward and attempt to break through the Miletian army beyond. There was good news, however, as the numbers positioned here lessened greatly to those to the south. To the host at the south and west. There was good news, however, as the numbers positioned here lessened greatly in comparison to the host. The south and west. Lessened greatly. less than greatly compared to that of the south and west. I'll come back to that. That needs work. Oh, just want to make sure I don't have that be right back message still on. Still getting to grips with all of this. Get rid. Unpin the message. There we go. Okay. Violet's hands tensed into fists as she was once again following the charge. Gripping the reins of her steeds, she fought the air that pelted her eyes at full gallop. She relived the sight of the Valetian troops clashing with the Miletians in the distance. She watched again as Arkham and Harlow pelted the battle choirs with magic from afar. Streams of flames and lightning flew beneath the stars and collided with the men in armor of black and yellow. Collided with armor of black and yellow. She jolted violently in her sleep as she relived the blow that threw her from her horse, an elbow colliding with her jaw as she pulled herself upright, the steed behind clipping her side as it flew past her. She struggled to fight at first. Keeping balance was hard enough. It wasn't long before she found her foil whip to be almost useless against the battle choirs, who stood like titans of steel. She resorted to grabbing a mace from the muddied ground, caving her arms weight into unseen faces that screamed beneath the iron helms before her. They fought through the line with moderate success and did their best to keep the gap open for those unable to fight. Well, come on. Best to keep the gap open for those unable to fight, allowing them to retreat. Towards the distant forest. Both sides were frantic and understandably distracted. The hellish giant within the capital threw its limbs about the city, causing tremors that floored hundreds of soldiers at a time. The Miletians looked to be just as ready to retreat as those fleeing the capital, breaking away from the conflict only to be commanded back to the fray by those leading from behind. Breathing quickened as she recalled the desperate sprint towards the forests and mountains in the distance. Her panting grew heavier in the night as the survivors began to disperse through the plains with little to no sense of direction. What was once a somewhat sensible formation turned into a free-for-all. Violet woke in a flash, her foil whip in hand and her heart pounding as she glared at the soldier above her. "Sorry, Mrs. D'Arcy, didn't mean to scare you," he pleaded, quickly panicked also at the tip of her foil reached for his neck. "The scouts are back. Juriel wants to update you, ma'am." It took a while for her heart to slow, and a while longer for her to lower her weapon. She mouthed a breathless sorry at the guardsman as he backed away and turned to his fellow troops to give out orders. She spied Juriel in the distance. He was doing his best to provide guidance to those around him, but clearly looked lost. Arkham stood by his side, possibly at an attempt to assist when the young mayor struggled to provide answers to the ever-growing group. She looked to Harlow, who was where she had left him the night before. My typing is terrible. Battered and bruised, the young mage sat against a thick oak and stared off into the distance. He was fear-stricken last night, but Violet witnessed him bludgeon a man to death. It was obvious that this was not sitting well with him, as he occasionally held his shaking hands up to look upon them with near disgust. Supporting a clause? Nah, it's fine, whatever. I'll come back. The young Valetian woman limped her way towards the small crowd, who parted willingly at her arrival. Arkham was out of sight until the final refugees made way to show him kneeling, holding a dishevelled Drax in his arms. "You're safe, my boy, you're safe," the old man reassured as the boy wept into his cloak. She glanced at Juriel, who beckoned her away from the crowd. He was now joined by one of the executioners that she had seen darting amongst the battle last night. She was unsure whose side they were on at first, but the deathly quick eliminations that they performed on countless Miletians put her mind at ease. She did not have the energy to support Drax at this moment, and as such elected to move around the group to avoid his attention. He was in good hands with Arkham, and she had her own concerns to deal with. "Have you found him?" she groaned, cradling the until now forgotten broken rib as it shot a sharp pain through her torso. She groaned, cradling a broken rib as it shot a sharp pain through her torso. Juriel, unable to respond himself, looked to the executioner to take the lead. "Okay." I keep forgetting to put music on. He was atop a tower about to be crushed by the damned king. Sanders croaked the final words as he knew what he must reveal next. Got to the end of the playlist already. No, so why did it stop? Whatever. Oh, jeez, that scared the shit out of us. Okay. Why have I done two with two O's there? Jesus. Oh, this laptop, this keyboard, man. I'm gonna lose me rag with it. 3. Why does this music keep stopping? Come on. Oh, it's because it's at the end, that's why. Dickhead. gonna have another quick break because I'm absolutely famished. So I'm gonna pause this music. And I will resume this.
His mother thankfully had a self-owned smithy that she was able to return to. She had the means to close shop and to live on comfortable wealth for the rest of her days. However, she was adamant that hitting large shards of fiery metal was therapeutic and kept her in shape. Despite the Tiet name being run through the mud, many fencers of renown could not deny that having the infamous Megrit back at an anvil was a godsend. As such, they would frequent the smithy for new weapons and armour. She had a special way with metal and made some of the finest Valetian foil whips in the city, including a matching pair that she gave to Teniel and Violette on their wedding day. They regularly sparred together with them, as Violette was never formally trained and wished to one day surpass her husband, a threat meant in humour, but which spurred Theniel on with his own development nevertheless. For the first time in his adult life, Theniel was unemployed. He would take occasional shifts in his mother's smithy, but didn't appear to provide much assistance. Megrit often commented kindly on his efforts regardless. "You're gifted at using foils, Thany, but you can't make them for shite." Whether consciously or not, Teniel's 3 sisters, the triplets, had also distanced themselves from the family. They had wed into other family names some years prior, and whilst the names were well respected, the husbands who gifted them were very eager to follow the crowd. Cecilia, the first sister to marry, did take after her mother in some regard, however. She was much too outspoken to be ordered around by anyone, especially a spineless husband. She would visit Theniel and Violette's cottage as a means of punishment, when she and her other half did not see eye to eye. Theniel assumed one of these impromptu visits was about to occur, when one morning he noticed a carriage pulling up beside his gate. Instinctually he set the kettle upon the hob and fetched some of the final black vine leaves from his failed plant in the garden. Upon waiting for Cecilia to burst through the door with a tale of ill-conceived betrayal on her husband's part, there was nothing. He waited a while longer, as she was often one to get lost in idle gossip with the neighbours. Eventually the kettle upon the stove began to boil. "What is she doing?" he thought to himself as he lifted the heavy copper onto the solid oak of the table. "Oh, splendid! Is that vine leaf?" Theniel's eyes darted to the open window. Peering in enthusiastically was an old, sprightly man. He was glancing between the bowl of leaves and Theniel with pleasant yet eager eyes. The old man's fingers were delicately gripped upon the bottom of the window frame, as an inquisitive yet innocent expression hid behind a large beard of silver and black hair, awaiting Theniel's response. Yes, it is. Can I help you?" The old man suddenly realised how this must have appeared, and tutted at himself as he rolled his eyes with mild exaggeration. Apologies, Arkham here. Arkham Drakdorian. I appear to be lost, you see. I was wondering if you could point me towards a Mr. Theniel Tiet, but then I saw the tea leaves, and smelt they were in fact vine leaves, and, I mean, they smell lovely, but I think the plant you got them from might be on death's door, if you don't mind me saying." The old man nodded to the wilting vine, which was still fighting for its life, beside him. The stranger took a few manic, strong whiffs as he raised his nostrils into the air. "Yes, I wouldn't pick any more from the same black vine if it's still standing after today, that is. After a certain point they become poisonous, you see. Death in the vine, death in the leaf, as they always say. Or they should say, rather. I'm unsure if that is a saying." The long stream of words was promptly followed by a strong laugh as he slapped the windowsill. Theniel laughed along politely as he walked towards and hesitantly opened the front door beside the old man. "I'm Theniel, Mr. Drakdorian." Arkham gave a slight skip as he approached Theniel with his arm out for a formal shake of the hand, only to change his mind at the last second, gently slapping Theniel on the shoulder. "Marvellous. Drakdorian indeed, Theniel. But call me Arkham, please. You see, I have come a long way to see you, sir. An awfully long way. Knew where I was going the entire time, but sadly got lost right at the end. Although I suppose finding a city in a country is much easier than finding a man in a city. They should say that too, if they don't already." Without much thought, the two began naturally walking through the kitchen to the table which held the tea, as Theniel tried to keep up with the conversation. And just as Arkham was about to take a chair, he snapped from his frantic waffle.
Oh my gracious me. I just walked us both into your house without an invitation. Do you mind, Theniel, my boy, if I— No, not at all. Have a seat. Theniel laughed, still trying to understand what was going on around him. Arkham spent a few minor moments reclaiming his breath as Theniel poured the tea. The word marvellous repeated under the old man's breath as he saw the boiled water begin to turn black from the vine leaves. Theniel didn't know where to start or what to ask first. However, he didn't need to worry about this as the moment he sat down, the aged gentleman began. I have important news that concerns you, you see, and your dear mother and sisters, and I understand you have a wife also. Begging your pardon. Young Violette Tiet also, yes? Theniel nodded patiently and politely corrected. Violette D'Assy, yes. Ah, yes, you Valetians allow names to be kept if wished. Yes, very progressive, your people. We have a lot to learn from you in the East, in Meleth. You're from Meleth? Theniel could not help but to interject. You've travelled all the way from Meleth? That must have taken weeks. About a fortnight from the border, yes, but in fact it's taken just over a month from my capital to your capital. Certainly made me wish High-Rise was closer to the border indeed, tensions be damned. Theniel resisted further interruptions. In normal circumstances, I would have just sent a blasted courier bird, you see, but I needed to be here anyway, and the information can't in all consciousness be trusted with any third party, even if it is a ruddy pigeon. You can't trust anything that defecates from a height. They should certainly say that. Arkham became aware of his own ramblings and stopped himself mid-thought. Apologies, my boy. My train of thought is a victim of age, you see. Medicinal remedies help, however, slows down the tongue and organises the mind. What can I get you? Is there anything you need? Arkham brushed his beard and reached into the satchel which rested on his lap. A good double of Meleth whisker and a pouch of Doc Moran tobacco, but don't trouble yourself, Mr. Tiet. I have my own.
By the time that Arkham had sufficiently medicated himself to coherence, Violette had returned home, and formalities had been exchanged. I'm sure your very welcoming husband would love to bring you up to speed, my dear, but I'm afraid I have yet to bring Theniel up to speed myself, you see. He smiled politely and finished his second glass of whisker. The good news, I suppose, is that we can discuss this with everyone on par, as it were. He looked at Theniel with slight hesitation. What I'm about to tell you may cause panic or questions, so I must first make this known. Despite the apparent time constraints involved, we have many days before anything may come to pass, my boy. Do you understand? Violette took Theniel's hand as he nodded. I've assumed this may be about Keller, is that right? It is about your brother, but it is also about many other things that are about to occur, things that the three of us have little control over. It's important that you recognize this. The wheels are already in motion, so to speak. Arkham lit his rolled tobacco, wrapped in a long tube of fine paper which hung from his brittle fingers. I'm under no illusion as to how Meleth is perceived on this side of the continent, so you have most likely guessed what lies at the heart of all of this. Violette attempted to hold back any sign of contempt for the Meletians as she replied, Magic. Indeed, for better or worse, that is what Meleth will always be known for. Despite being a practitioner myself, I empathize with your own interests to limit its use. Despite the strides we have taken, it is dangerous in the wrong hands, as we are all too aware, given that your fine country was born from the rift that was caused in what was once a unified continent. Arkham took a draw of his tobacco and continued. I do not wish to bore you with the intricacies of our ways, but simply put, different forms of magics are evoked through different languages and tempos in which the tongue is chanted, so to speak. Meletian, Veletian, and Shard, Violette answered. Theniel was one of the few to know the dark history of Violette's family, that until recently they supported the scholars of Meleth in secrecy, something almost taboo within the city walls. Yes, my dear, the dead languages of our neighboring regions and the Shard, not just a dead language but a dead civilization from the west, skyskins as they are sometimes, indelicately referred. Theniel nodded. I'm a scholar at our capital, High-Rise. It's my job to monitor students and colleagues alike, to ensure that these languages are not abused, you see. Whilst I specialize in the imbuing of properties within objects, an art originating from your Veletian dialect, I was made aware that a fellow scholar had begun to reach beyond his station. Secret meetings with his close aides, disappearing for days at a time, general rumors of ill-doings. Despite the numerous reports from the teaching towers, I was unable to confirm anything until 6 weeks passed. Our man, Shaltanan, had abandoned his offices and home, along with several others who saw themselves as loyal followers. Arkham almost spat at the thought. Apparently they met in dark chambers like some form of ill-conceived cult, pathetically childish. What did you find? Violette, aware of the devastation that could be caused, could no longer hide her concern. Children, the old man sighed, all healthy and unharmed, but children nonetheless who were likely abducted from the slums below the academy. At first, we concluded that they may have been trying to instruct these children, creating some form of youth militia, giving up when reaching the obvious conclusion that children are ill-equipped for such teachings. But then I saw the documents he had left behind. Arkham tapped his tobacco over the tray on the table and appeared to relive the fear of what he found. I have no idea where he found this knowledge, but he knew things. History of a long-forgotten, even considered mythical nation. Whilst we have never known the nation's true name, we in the scholarly circles have often just referred to it as the Keep, due to folk tales and descriptions passed through generations. Arkham leant forward in earnest as he began to put this information together. Shaltanan had found a long-forgotten language, and with it, an unknown form of magic. And from what I've read, this wasn't the type of sorcery that heals or enchants. It even makes the destructive art of my own Meletian heritage appear tame. This was something worse, an art of communing or summoning, perhaps. Summoning what? Whilst Violette had a family history which involved the support of magic, the Tiet family had little knowledge or care for such things. Theniel could tell by his wife's expression that he should be a lot more concerned than he was. We don't know, but the children were involved somehow. I went to my king with the news, a man I had once respected greatly, despite his shortcomings. However, His Majesty Murdoch IV already knew of Shaltanan's so-called achievements and requested a demonstration of his newly found strategic abilities, whatever that may mean. He's coming here. Theniel leapt from his chair, with his hands still planted firmly upon the table. He wants to reclaim Alviette. Why? I don't think he wants to retake this land. The mage pondered, stubbing out his tobacco as fine embers floated amongst the candlelight. I've surmised that he means to destroy it. Arkham pulled himself up to Theniel with a hand upon the young man's shoulder. Shaltanan leads the Meletian army here, my friend, and with this new magic of his, I doubt he will even need them. Theniel looked to Violette, and could tell she had also pieced it together. They had Copulus execute my brother. It seems that there is a corrupt pope in the clergy, Arkham sympathized, and they have assisted Shaltanan by removing this city's most valuable assets, a capable leader, and his just as capable family. I need both of you to come with me. There is someone I'd like you to meet. Chapter 2. Burning the good and carving the bad. Rain slammed against stained windows as smoke waltzed around the oak and stone chamber. Murdoch IV exhaled with a mixture of heavy laughter and chested hacks as he blew another thick cloud onto his lap. He hunched meekly over an intricate vase which glowed softly, its white embers fighting from within. Whilst his frail thighs held around its base, he lazily glanced up to the patient court members around the table. 9 advisors sat silently, each with intricate yellow robes of silk, each hidden beneath black veils, and each trembling discreetly in their own way. The decision to look at their king or to look away was often an impossible one to make, and without a correct choice. Previous members of the court had unintentionally provoked the king's wrath for staring, and others had been punished for turning their cheek to him. Over time, those that remained had elected to stare at the veiled figure directly opposite them, as if sat at attention like soldiers. Murdoch enjoyed this greatly. There was once a time where choking on his Mormasani vase brought him slight embarrassment, but when the addiction began to grow and his court began to shrink, he gradually cared less. Once the veiled began to sit facing each other, attentive and statuesque, Murdoch began to relax somewhat. He felt alone, like a child in a room of dolls, bringing them to life when it pleased him. It pleased him in this moment, and as his head dipped for another lung full, he croaked, "No one going to ask me where I have sent our army." The 2 closest twitched under their Milesian valour. With a slight cock of the head, one attempted a response void of tone or inflection. "I am sure my king has good reason to send his arms out of the capital." The young male voice paused to assess the best choice of words. "However, there have been queries as to the intent from those outside of court." The man snapped his head back to attention, seeing a slight nod from the shrouded silhouette opposite. Smoke crept across the table once more, like a predator stalking candlelight. "I'm not surprised." Murdoch exhaled. His left hand slapped upon the oak gently as his heart began to drum once again. His eyelids fluttered, and he attempted to hide the rush he was experiencing. Within a matter of seconds, the adrenaline washed away, and his glazed eyes looked back to the audience. "My army has been ordered to the city-states, westward." The king fixed his eyes upon those sat before him, looking for a reaction, looking for a response to question. All but one remained lifeless and obedient. Furthest from him and on his left, a female hand had been gripping itself into a fist for the entire session. The grip had been so strong that the delicate hand was as white as bone. It did not shake, but Murdoch could not help but smirk as he saw that her nails had drew blood from their own palm. Several droplets showed themselves upon the table beneath her fist. Another voice attempted to bring the king back from his attentive stare. "Do you wish for us to communicate anything on your behalf, your majesty? To the lords and ladies, that is?" Murdoch was not quick enough to confirm which of the shapes spoke, but he was much too amused to care. "If any of them question their king's intentions, I want you to tell them what happened to the last one." Murdoch gently patted the vase whilst fixed upon the distant hand. He went slowly. A stronger, hollow knock of the vase echoed among the chambers. Painfully, stronger still, so much life. The next knock led her hand to twitch, wailing in his chest. Another, "I've never felt trembling, death, shaking, like it." As Murdoch's hand went for a final knock, the veiled woman let out a soul-churning wail. The chair flew from beneath her. Her bloody hand stretched to Murdoch as she flew herself onto the table. Her arms flung her across the varnished top, not even attempting to pick herself up from her stomach. As the scream continued, the knock fell upon the vase, this time joined by the crash of the chamber doors behind the addict king. Closer still, she threw herself as the tearing of her throat announced itself for all to hear. The armoured shapes raced behind the king. With one last push, she almost took to the air. Her hands and weight leapt towards Murdoch. A gauntlet grabbed beneath the veil and gripped her convulsing throat. The rabid body was thrown against a wall by her neck as she kicked, screaming up blood. The two giants in iron began to pin her still, and the king took another toke. With a struggle, he stood up and limped towards her, her son still heavy in his lungs. Murdoch gently lifted the veil and showed the mother beneath. Bloodshot eyes drowning in tears, malnourished face longing for revenge, teeth stained in crimson and voice cracking under the bleed. He placed his frail hand upon her cheek and exhaled into her gasps. Murdoch smiled as her breathing began to race further in the smoke. Her eyes rolled, showing nothing but white. He was so terrified. Can you feel it? He let the veil drop once again as the guards lifted her from the wall. I hope it runs in the family, Camillan. I don't have much of him left. The guards were gone as quickly as they appeared, and Murdoch slumped back to his chair and let the Mormasani vase fall back between his thighs. He glimpsed upon the statues before him, motionless and to attention. Another burn, another lung full, dead clouds released into the air above. For the safety of Melith, Alviette will burn. Tell the lords and ladies that no refugees are to cross our borders alive. Any to go against this order will watch their family burn, either on a stake or in my vase. He waved his hand at the court. Now leave me with this young man who dared question his king.
Theniel and Violette stood at the opening of a dark walkway under the midnight moon. Its silver light tracing the edges of the unkempt brickwork and knotted beams of buildings which framed either side of the path ahead. Luckily, both were smart enough to know that travelling through the city at night would require arms, but neither expected the wise old man to have brought them here, of all places. "You've hid him in the Dyers?" Theniel spat at Arkham. "Are you mental?" Arkham pondered the name without full comprehension. "The Dyers? That's a Dyer alley," Violette replied, clutching the foil whip by her side. "You never go down the alleys in this city, unless you want mugging, killing, or—" Arkham stroked his beard, somewhat embarrassed at the realization. "He's with my Harlow. He'll be safe. I told them not to leave and to lock themselves in until my return." "Fair enough, sir. But we must get to them first, and we don't really have the time to wait until morning. Not that it's much safer in daylight." Theniel paced from wall to wall, glancing into the dark ahead. "Violette, pull out your foil. We'll need to cover each side as we head through." He brought his own rapier into his hand and pointed it ahead. "It's going to be too tight for us to use these if we get into a fight, Theny." Violette placed her back against one side and measured the distance by reaching out and touching the tip of her sword against the other. "We stand either side and check our corners. If we play it safe, then we'll only have trouble ahead of us where we have more space. Doorways, trash piles, crates, we check everywhere as we move forward. Arkham, you stay behind and direct us at a whisper, and get ready to take a long step back so we have room if we must fight." Violette and Arkham nodded as Theniel took the first guarded steps into the shadows. They moved in silence through the alleys as Arkham tapped Theniel on either shoulder when a turn was needed. After a few minutes, the group became more sensitive to the deathly silence around them, occasionally twitching at their own steps or loose stones that they accidentally knocked across the floor. After a while, the moonlight became of little use, as the buildings on either side began to grow, and on some occasions had higher floors which were built slightly over the walkways, preventing any light from reaching them. Luckily, Arkham reassured the couple that they were nearly at their destination. "One last turn to the left, fourth door on your right," he whispered. As Violette spied the turning ahead, her arm reached out to stop Theniel beside her. "Firelight!" Theniel moved to Violette's side of the path to gain a better vantage, and could see the flickering light creeping in from around the corner. Whilst he could see no shadows or movement, he knew that fires weren't often set up in the alleys unless a group were denning nearby. Not even the homeless would find refuge in the Dyers at night, and only a group would feel safe enough to draw attention to themselves with a campfire. Theniel signalled the others to wait, and he slowly crept ahead, making sure to find safe footing in the new light which reached from around the corner. He peered cautiously into the alley and could see the fire gently crackling in the centre of the walkway. However, the flames made it impossible to see past the light. The fencer waited for any sound of movement, voices, or even snoring. Nothing. He knew it was a risk, but they had no choice. There was no guarantee that they could find another way around, and even if they could, it would be unlikely that it would be any safer. He waved his wife forward, who in turn ushered Arkham to follow behind. Together they stepped into the alleyway with care, the Valetians poised with their foil whips pointed either side of the fire pit. Theniel felt a disturbing unease with each patient step forward. The fact that none of them could see beyond the flames, the fact that the crackling now made it almost impossible to hear anything else, the fact that his eyes were almost certainly adjusting to the light, making it harder to see once they would have the fire behind them. It must be a trap. Without signalling, he made a snap judgment. With a quick flick of his foot, he kicked at the fire which was now immediately in front of him. Hooking one of the heavier logs forward, he launched it towards the darkness ahead. As the embers and several logs flew forward, so did the light from their flames. Pale faces and glimmering eyes revealed themselves ahead. Some of the figures closest shielded themselves from the ignited wood that came towards them. The rest moved forward, smiles and knives catching the night light. Instinctually, the three took a leap backwards and positioned themselves appropriately, ready to fight despite the countless bodies ahead of them. At a quick count, Theniel saw possibly 12, but that was only what the flames reached, outnumbered even for 2 talented fencers. Remember Vi, pierce the singles and whip the groups. Theniel tried to sound calm, confident, at least for Violette's sake. Arkham stepped further back with panicked whispers under his breath. With a leap, one of the thugs leapt over the fire with an axe in hand. Immediately, Violette took Theniel by surprise as she lunged forward with her foil. Its lengthened debole entered the man who had yet found the right posture for a strike of his own. As she panted in panic, she instinctually remembered her training, and with a flick of the wrist she tore the handle downwards, allowing the coils hidden in the foil's tip to carve down the man's torso. The wound immediately glittered in the firelight as he tried to scream. The body fell and 2 more found their way around the fire. Theniel took a lunge of his own, piercing the next thug in the cheek. With another flick, the coil carved down and hooked into the man's jawbone, forcing him to the floor before he had time to react. Meanwhile, Violette's own attack was knocked away by her adversary as he threw his arm up and used his short sword to bat her blade to the side. With immediate reactions, however, she used the momentum of the knock to arc her blade back round, this time whipping the coils across his bare throat. As the crack of the whip foil echoed against the walls, the thug dropped his sword and clutched at the wound. As the husband and wife took another step back, Arkham's manic whispers grew louder, but the incoherent rambling still made no sense to either of the Valetians. Violette snatched the short sword from the floor and threw it immediately into the darkness ahead. With a damp thud, another body fell from the shadows, this time directly into the fire pit. Whilst another shape began to emerge, a small glint of steel darted through the air. Before either could react, the dagger had landed into Theniel's arm. Without thought, he dropped his foil from the pane and unsheathed the dagger from its wound. 2 more figures leapt forward with haste. Violette once again reached down, this time stealing Theniel's foil and wielding it on her left. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Theniel watched as she whipped both foils with deadly precision. With each lunge, the woman flicked the tips of both swords from wall to wall. Her right glanced across the eyes of the first thug, her left followed with a whip to the thigh of the next. Not yet on his knees, she followed up with a flick downwards, carving across the first thug's face. Now out of position, a third reached back for a swing at Violette, only to be hit with the dagger from Theniel. Violette began backing herself to her husband and handed his foil back. They were now several paces from the fire, and the bodies kept coming. Now at least 8 stood between them and the pit. With a hand on each of the Valetians' shoulders, Arkham pulled himself a step ahead of them and led his whispered ramblings to a crescendo. "Eri pabellis kalosh." With his hands stretched out to either side, the air began to sizzle before him. Theniel could see the heat in the air. In almost the blink of an eye, an eruption blew out from the old man's chest as it threw all three of them backwards. As soon as Theniel felt himself airborne, he was unable to hear or see. Instead, all he felt was his limp body hit the street like a sack of meat. It took him a while to regain any sense of where he was, but when the white light faded from his eyes, he saw Violette above him. The ringing began to fade as he heard his wife's voice, still glancing to the mob ahead of them, still with foil in hand. "Are you okay, Theny? Come on, get up, Theniel." He slowly sat himself up as he looked to the alley ahead. There was no movement, no thugs, not even a campfire. Instead, the alley was glowing, covered in soot and floating embers. The stone floor was red with heat, and the walls of the buildings either side were cracked and black. Cremated bodies lay frozen in their last moments, some still upright and slowly crumbling under their own weight. "What the fuck was that, Theny?" Violette was clearly shaken, as would Theniel have been, if he had fully regained his thoughts. "Arkham, where's the mage?" he moaned. They both looked back and saw the old man's body against the far wall. "Questions later, Vi. We need to get Arkham somewhere safe." Theniel stood and clutched the wound on his arm. "4 doors down," he said. "On the right. Let's take him inside and see if this boy is worth all the trouble."